Hi, I'm Coy Barefoot. Coming up, the conservative voice. I'll talk to Shaun Kenney, the former executive director of the Republican Party of Virginia. What is a conservative to do when he feels abandoned by his own party? Welcome to the program. Shaun Kenney joins me. He is the former executive director of the Republican Party of Virginia and a contributing editor at the Bearing Drift. It's bearingdrift.com. That's Virginia's conservative voice. Shaun Kenney, I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So my first question, I want to talk about Trump and the Republicans and conservatism and your read on this election. Let's start with what happened just a few weeks ago. In the pages of Bearing Drift, you made a momentous statement that got some national coverage. It was on Twitter. Lots of people were talking about it. Former GOP head of Virginia says what? What did you say, Shaun?
I would not support Trump and will oppose him if he becomes the nominee. The good news is that I wasn't alone in that kind of statement. You've seen others. Erickson, for instance, formerly at Red State, currently with a new project. You've seen the National Review come out and say likewise. There's a lot of risible discontent with the idea that somebody of Trump's character, with his background and what he stands for and believes in, could actually carry the nomination of the party of Reagan. And you're seeing that split, and it's really unnerved a lot of folks within the Republican Party, quite honestly, because a lot of us who have devoted the better part of 2 or 3 decades of our careers to the conservative movement, to watch somebody who literally on every single point, whether it's free trade, whether it's the role of government, whether it's a 30,000 person deportation force, literally stands up and just sort of flips the table and repudiates everything that Reaganism believed in. So it's been an interesting month, let's put it that way.
Yeah, what's been the reaction from your friends in the Republican Party and other conservatives when you came out and said that?
Well, honestly, at first it was sort of muted silence, right? It's like, will Shaun get away with this? And I guess the answer to that was yes, right? So initially what happened is you get a lot of emails going back and forth and saying, thank God somebody said that. And then those emails start becoming a little bit more public, and then you start seeing it on Twitter, and then all of a sudden you see op-eds saying likewise. So it's somewhat gratifying. But the long and short of it is that there's a lot of discontent within the Republican Party, to where if Donald Trump does become the nominee, and it's increasingly looking like that's probably going to happen at this rate, where do conservatives go? It's very difficult for them to pull the lever for Trump, who is at best a vulgarian, at worst populism bleeding into nationalism. And we just saw just a while ago that he was asked point blank in the pages of Politico, will you declare war on Mexico if they don't pay for your wall? And Trump didn't really say no. He actually believes he can bully others into making this case. And so when you get that sort of rhetoric introducing itself into the national discourse, and when folks are sort of willing to excuse some of the craziness, or they really don't even care what the man believes, he's just going to fix it. I think to sort of the intellectual branch of conservatism, or for the folks that honestly believe that their party stood for something different than that, it's been quite a shock. I think it's been a great deal of an awakening, and I'm gratified at least to see that there are others within the Republican Party that feel likewise.
So you and I have spoken many, many times on radio and television, and we've talked about this before, that we both can understand where many of the Trump supporters are coming from. Sure. This anti-establishment populism, this anger, they feel like, and many on the left who are going with Bernie Sanders feel the same way. Yep. They feel like my party has abandoned me. The economic system no longer works for me. Washington has turned its back on Main Street, on the 99%, whatever you want to call it, right, and now just represents the interests of a financial elite on Wall Street. I'm being very simplistic here, but this is where people are coming from. So they look at somebody like Trump, or they look at somebody like Sanders. You're not one of them. You're not one of the establishment. You'll go in there and fix this and change things. So in a real sense, I think we both can understand here where a lot of these people are coming from.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not saying that some of the sentiment isn't bad, right? I mean, this is what happens when creative destruction takes over and forgets the people that it's leaving behind. It's one thing to go ahead and change into a service industry. It's one thing to go ahead and, whether it's, you know, the war on coal or textile plants shutting down or economies simply changing over time. The problem is in that chase for the destruction in order to achieve new economies, you leave a lot of folks behind. And you're seeing that within the candidacy of Bernie Sanders. You're seeing it with Donald Trump. That sentiment, I understand and I appreciate it. It's, you know, but that raises the question, but there are several different ways of answering it. And it concerns me, at least, that so many within our party, at least within the Republican Party, seem to want to chase the solutions of a strong man rather than doing something that might be a little bit more difficult, but a lot more virtuous, which is sort of digging back in, retraining our workforce, offering paths to entrepreneurship, and then actually starting to build a free society rather than point at somebody else, whether it's an Hispanic or a Muslim, and say, it's your fault that I'm not living up to my potential, and having that sort of discourse. That to me is totally unhealthy.
And pointing that anger at other human beings who are different from you rather than pointing that anger at real economic or problems that exist,
right.
that there are solutions to. We know for a fact, you know, like capitalism for one. Maybe we could have a little bit more capitalism instead of corporate socialism. That might actually be good for our economy.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah.
but that's sort of the conversation that we need to have. I mean, right now you've got two sides sort of trying to steal from the other half. And that's not America. That's not the way we've really operated. And it's happened over the course of time. A lot of people identify, you know, happiness or achieving the American dream and how many things they have collected around them. I mean, certainly over the last 20 years, we've spent billions and billions of dollars through marketing telling us that, you know, we're too fat, we're too skinny, we're not eating the right things, we should be eating the wrong things. Look at this pound burger that you should be eating. Buy the latest Apple, buy this, buy that. I mean, you spend that kind of money, you know, over the course of 20 years convincing a society that something's wrong because they don't have these things, and that if they only had the right jobs or the right cars or whatever the case may be, you know, life would be better, and then point to the outside and say that the reason why I'm not getting these things isn't because, you know, maybe I'm not working hard enough or whatever the case may be, but somebody took my job, somebody stole my happiness from me, and I need to go after that individual and sort of round them out. I mean, that's never been American. I mean, and we've seen this race from time to time. I mean, for instance, in the 1940s with Father Coughlin and the populist movement there and the America Firsters. We've seen it there. We've seen it with George Wallace on the Democratic side. We've seen it with Pat Buchanan in the early 90s.
Yeah,
where,
92.
Yeah,
right.
with NAFTA and whatnot, and opposing free trade in favor of protectionism. We've seen it, you know, with Joe McCarthy. We've seen it so many times in the American experiment where we have this tendency to go after the other. And put our blames there because it's easy. It's what human beings do. We're very tribal at the end of the day. But all that having been
that
said,
tribal instinct helped keep us alive for hundreds of
thousands of years.
It served us well, yes. But is it serving us well now in many regards in which somebody like a Trump or a demagogue or a strongman taps into that?
And see, and this is supposed to be the purpose of an education at the end of the day, right? Is that, you know, we use our reason to overcome our appetites. And unfortunately, you know, and this has been a very recent phenomenon, and I don't think we've really addressed it clearly enough, but, you know, in an age of modern marketing and even in political circumstances, you know, it's much easier to grab onto something emotive. When you see it in direct mail and there's a picture of a wolf barking at a woman or something like that, and go ahead, you can probably find these very easily. You'll probably see them before November. You know, but both parties use this, and they chase after the emotional advantage. You see it in advertising all the time, and so we're kind of conditioning ourselves to be this way, and that has an impact on our discourse at the end of the day. It has an impact on the way we view problems.
Right.
It has an impact on the way we view solutions.
Because you obviate critical thinking in favor of just a raw emotional impulse.
You objectify, and that's exactly what, and whether it's a solution, whether it's a problem at home, whether it's a problem in our civil discourse. It's much easier to say, well, the reason why we can't have civil discourse is because Muslims are throwing bombs at good Americans overseas. Well, that has nothing to do with whether or not your road gets paved or whether or not your children get taught or whether or not transportation solutions are coming down out of D.C. or whatever the case may be. It's a way of getting out of these tough decisions, and believe me, we do have some serious problems facing our country. We've got a $19 trillion deficit. Number of Americans in the workforce are down. In Virginia, we've got problems with education and transportation, all that.
Student loan bubble.
Student loan bubble, the credit card bubble, which still hasn't deflated since the Great Recession. We've got so many problems that again, human beings created created, I'm firmly convinced, and I've got the same kind of Jeffersonian optimism that you and many others across the political spectrum have, that we created these problems as human beings and we can solve them as human beings. But we're not going to solve them by saying, and these human beings can't be a part of that solution. That to me is completely antithetical to not just the conservative movement, I think it's antithetical to what we believe as Americans.
And if there's any one takeaway from the story of America, it's that when we embrace the other and when we bring more people to the table, when we empower people, when we protect the rights with which they are born as well, it makes our country stronger, it makes our economy stronger, it makes our schools stronger, it makes our families stronger. I mean, you can go down the list.
Sure.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, and this is what fascinates me about the protectionist argument you're hearing from Trump and to some degree from Sanders, is that protectionism is sort of it's the first drop on the that rolls it down the hill and turns into a massive snowball. If I were to be a protectionist at the end of the day, then you're almost striving for some degree of autarky, that you can somehow be an island unto yourself and self-sufficient. The free market doesn't do that. The free market kind of argues and makes the argument, says that you and I working together will find somebody else and we'll bring everybody in, and this makes us a great, free, prosperous society. Protectionist arguments at the end of the day close that out, and they say these are others and these the others and I've got mine, and the only way I can be self-sufficient is if I continue to expand what I view as my protectionist circle. And unfortunately, and we've seen this in the long history of nations, when we start, and this is the reason why democracies never went to war, is because we were never protectionist. And when we start becoming protectionist, that's where somebody else doesn't have what I need and I go after it, whether that's oil in Iraq, or whether it's something else overseas. And that sort of mentality too often leads to conflict, and it leads to global conflict. And that's just the entire antithesis of what Americans have practiced overseas.
The free market also makes a mad dash overseas for cheap labor. Just like once upon a time after the Civil War, jobs in the North made a mad dash into the South with textile and manufacturing jobs because that's where the cheap labor was.
Sure.
And it continues to run around the globe looking for the cheapest, most controllable labor force that it can.
And this is where you've got to balance out, right? So that creative destruction that you're talking about there, that's where you have to balance that out, because that sort of exchange at the end of the day can be beneficial. You go ahead, you take these, I mean, certainly the people that are getting those jobs are benefiting from, increased labor participation, increased wages, jobs that, quote, Americans won't do, things of this nature. But on the flip side of it, too, is that when those jobs leave, you have to have some sort of apparatus that retrains Americans for the new workforce. And that's the component that we're missing here. It's not that we're less productive. We're the most productive Americans,
We're
generation.
working harder than we've ever worked, and yet the purchasing power of the average family is on par with the late 1970s.
And that's the problem that collectively we have to fix. Most of these problems that we're facing, and all of what you're hearing from Trump, and just to a large degree Saunders, it's all symptomatic of a greater problem. Until we fix that problem, start putting more money into hardworking families, and make work pay again, then we're stuck and we're spinning our wheels. But again, the solutions are out there. They're just not going to be found.
And right now that tide that is supposed to lift all boats is lifting the yachts.
It's lifting some, but it's not lifting everybody. And the solutions are out there, but they're not going to be found in demagoguing the opposition.
Right. And so what's your read then? What's going to happen? I mean, do we go into a brokered convention, and what exactly, explain that to people. What does that mean? What will that look like?
Sure.
And what do you think is going to happen going forward?
So a brokered convention would mean that one of the candidates does not get the 1,260 some odd votes needed to go ahead and win the convention outright.
They might get a lot of votes, but not enough to nail down the nomination.
Exactly. So what could very well happen is that all the candidates end up going into what's called a brokered convention. You have the formality of a first round of voting. You get that through. And then you go ahead and you start horse trading at that rate. And so what happens at this rate...
So all those delegate counts, just to back up for a minute, all those numbers are pretty much erased. You start over. All those primaries... we'll forget about those, all those when people voted, and now the delegates get to decide.
Right, because you're bound on the first ballot, but you're not bound on the second ballot.
Right.
And so that's, in theory, how this should work. Now, there's a couple of other things in there, like, for instance, in 2012, when Mitt Romney had won the nomination, he tried to make sure that Ron Paul could not speak at the convention. There was a certain rule that was embedded in there. That rule may or may not go away. But nevertheless, ideally, this is how it should work out. When the horse trading begins, this is where you start finding out who's vice presidential picks, whatever the case may be. Deals get cut. It's the very worst and most cynical of any political environment, but this is how the sausage ultimately gets made.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, could Trump come out of a brokered convention and not be the presidential nominee for the Republican Party? Possible. but not probable. As it stands right now, the numbers, the way they're cooked in right now, Trump is more than likely going to be your nominee for the Republican Party. It would be, there would take something absolutely fantastic moving into the next week or so to really change that dynamic.
So how do you feel about that? I mean, you know, you and I both know politics is a team sport. You got to pick a team to get down on that field, and then you got to support your team. When they give you the ball to carry, you got to block, you got to run, you got to move your ball down the field. That's how that game is played. So how do you feel about your quarterback being Donald Trump?
I ain't playing for the Dallas Cowboys. Sorry. And you know, and there's the thing, right? It's one thing to be a part of a group. It's one thing to be a part of a movement or whatever the case may be. And if you're the leader of that movement, you know, maybe that's something you want to do. But when you look over your shoulder and you see David Duke, you look over your shoulder and you see like the nativist contingent of the Republican Party. You look over your shoulder and you see a bunch of people that just sort of want their jobs back, and we're lying to them about, oh yeah, we'll bring those jobs back, wink, but that's never going to happen. Is that really the kind of mob that you want to be in charge of, if not much less, you know, a part of? And in all honesty, you know, while I empathize with a great deal of what's changed about America, and I think that there's been too much destruction and not enough creativity when it comes to creative destruction, I can't be a part of a populist right that seeks solutions and demagoguing not just other individuals, but in whole demographics of individuals, specifically Hispanics and Muslims. It's just not the kind of human being I am. It's not what I'm taught as a Catholic. It's not my faith. And quite honestly, it's not the Republican Party that I've given 20 years of my life to. I can't be a part of that mob. And if that is the solution, if we're going to have an honest election between a nationalist and a socialist, or somebody a little bit milder than that, I don't know where I would fall on that spectrum. I think that within myself, certainly there's a great deal of communitarian ethic, but I just can't find myself being a part of the populist right. That's just not who I am.
So what does the Republican Party do, Shaun? What does the conservative movement do? What do conservatives do who feel like this party no longer represents what I stand for? This party's doing something dangerous,
sure,
some might say. I am one of them. This party is going off the rails. And the voters are doing it. The voters are going to the booth and saying, I am so anti-establishment, I am so angry that I'll vote for somebody like Trump, even though I don't like him. At least he is not one of them. At least he'll shake it up. So what are conservatives supposed to do in America? What's the future for American conservatism?
Well, I mean, and this is to some part, you know, kind of the wake-up call, right? Is that, you know, you had National Review. Back in the 1960s, William Buckley could go ahead and point at the John Birch Society and say, you are not a part of this movement, and it happened, right?
They were marginalized, right, yeah. Totally shut out.
We cannot do that anymore. I mean, the conservatives now have to face the reality that they are not just a minority in the United States, they're a minority within their own party. And so a couple of things have to come out, and we've yet to see what the outcoming of this is, right? So we could form our own third party, and it would be a sizable third party, but it would only serve to deny Donald Trump the victory. It wouldn't necessarily serve to assert conservative ideals. They could remain within the Republican Party and sort of provide an insurgency, but for how long and to what ends? You know, I honestly don't know. The one thing that I do know is that, you know, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, I mean, I as an individual have a couple of things that I can do. I can vote, I can be an activist, I can speak out, I can write, I can
do
talk.
shows like this.
I can do shows like this, right? My vote cannot assent to a Donald Trump presidency. Will not, cannot, and my vote can, I mean, I cannot stand by and allow that sort of populism to govern this country. So I owe it to myself to, at least as a participant in the political process, to resist and to speak up and provide alternatives. That might not happen overnight. I realize this. And I think a lot of conservatives are in the same boat, but I think fundamentally, and this is true in the Democratic Party as well, you know, everybody knows that something is wrong. Nobody really knows how to fix it. And until we start coalescing around those ideas and perhaps figuring out what the solutions are not, maybe we'll get there sooner to what the solutions might really be.
Right. And I think it begins with, as you and I have spoken before, it begins with recognizing the corruption which has totally taken over the process. And we know what it is. It's gerrymandering, it's rent-seeking economics, it's Citizens United, it's these elements that have been put in place that have completely corrupted the system so that the system no longer serves the citizenry it was designed to serve, the interests of that citizenry, and it continues to serve a very small fraction of that citizenry who continue to get wealthier and wealthier and think everything's great.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately that's really the case. I mean, no longer do we have representatives. We really have ambassadors from government. We have a government that's really playing both sides, right? It's socialism needs corporatism in order to survive. Corporatism needs the socialists in order to rig the rules. And so both sides kind of play it off of one another. And what happens to the individuals is we get bread and circuses.
Yeah.
This is supposed to entertain us for a time until we figure out that something's really not right with this. This is not what the founders intended. That really what we're looking for is some degree of constitutionalism, but one that actually addresses the needs of human beings, not in the sense that government's providing for it, but that they're actually giving me the opportunity to provide for myself and for my family.
Right.
That's what we're all looking for.
That there's a role for government to play to make sure that there's a level playing field in the marketplace, that if somebody invents a better mousetrap, that it's going to actually be able to compete in a free market versus corporate interests shut it out.
Yeah, corporate
use the power of
buying
government,
up the patent, right?
use the power of government to make your competition go away. Classic rent-seeking economics. That's corruption.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. But the way it works now is that you go ahead, you have somebody go ahead and buys up the patent, they lock it up for the next 15 years.
Right.
So once again, that concert between the socialist left and the corporatist right seems to work against the little guy. It seems to work against the entrepreneur. And that to me is, I mean, that's not what Reagan believed. It's not what Kennedy believed. It's not what FDR believed. It's not what Roosevelt believed, Teddy Roosevelt. This runs against the grain of everything we believe as Americans. And for too long, we've sort of allowed the system to lull us to sleep. And I firmly believe that there is a third way in American politics. I don't know what it looks like. I don't think it's libertarian necessarily at the end of the day, although there are libertarian aspects to it. I don't think it's conservative at the end of the day, although there are certainly conservative aspects to it. I don't think it's liberal.
Right.
It's not democratic.
But
it's
there's
not
liberal
Republican.
aspects to it.
Yeah, there's liberal aspects to it. So, but whatever this primordial is, whatever it is, there is a communitarian ethic, I think, that can rise above the current morass of politics. And at some point in time, the American public's going to wake up and say, you know what, this isn't working for us. It's working for somebody else.
Yeah.
And we'll get a sort of change, and we'll come to that. I have to hold firm to that Jeffersonian optimism.
I'm with you.
Because otherwise, the world becomes a real bleak Hobbesian place real quick.
We have to go forward as Americans, because this is what it means to be American.
Yeah.
We have to go forward believing that the best days are yet to come, that there is a renaissance for human liberty, that we can, in our own little blip of a moment here on this earth, we can help make that happen.
Sure.
But you have to push back against political corruption. You have to push back against any force that profits off of the suppression of human liberty. And they're out there.
Sure. And we've seen this, and here's the good news, right? Every 80 years, we seem to go through one of these moments in American history. We had 1780, we had the Revolution, right? Fast forward 80 years, it was 1860, and we had the Civil War. Fast forward to that, it was 1940, and the Second World War. And fast forward to that, it's 2020. Hopefully it doesn't involve war.
Yeah.
But every single time the American people have been given an opportunity to renew the charter, right? To renew what it means to be an American.
To rediscover our ideals.
To rediscover what we believe, right?
Right.
And to reaffirm the principles in the Declaration and our constitutional privileges and all these things, we've always risen to that challenge, right? So I've got to believe that the best days are ahead of us. Yes, it's a tough time. May you live in interesting times has always been a curse. But the solutions are out there. We're going to find them together, but we're not going to find them if we pitch to one side or the other on the political spectrum, nor are we going to find them if we turn around and say, yes, we're going to find a new American century, but only for these people, not for these people.
Right.
And that's
you got to be the right religion, you got to be the right color, you got to live in the right neighborhood, then you'll have freedom.
You have to have the right principles. And there's the other trick too, is that we hear a lot of talk about principles today. Principles are worthless unless the values behind them are sound. And that's, ultimately, when you look at Trump and Sanders, Clinton, Rubio, pick your poison, right? Without the values to back up those principles, they're worthless. And right now, we're really having a national conversation about what we truly value in this society. I like where the conversation's headed, at least in quiet circles. I'm not so sure I like the political veneer, but amongst folks of like minds, I think we know what we're not about. And I think that's a positive thing. And the more we sharpen that, I think we'll have a better chance.
So the takeaway here is, let's not have another, let's not play to the worst angels of our nature. Let's rediscover the ideals on which this country was founded. Let's play to those, regardless of your party.
Yeah.
Let's talk about democracy and human liberty and justice.
Yeah, play to our virtues, don't play to our vices.
Yeah. Shaun, thank you for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Shaun Kenney, he is the former executive director of the Republican Party of Virginia, and you can read his work online at thebearingdrift.com. It's Virginia's conservative voice. I'm Coy Barefoot. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Hey, before I let you go, I want to share with you from the archive a classic Barefoot Excursions, a visit to U-Hall at the University of Virginia. Have a terrific week, and y'all be good to each other. Hi, I'm Coy Barefoot here at the University of Virginia, and this is University Hall at UVA, which opened in the fall of 1965 and was the largest indoor arena in Virginia. Construction on the now historic University Hall at UVA actually began in 1961. It was built to replace Memorial Gymnasium, which had first opened in 1924, and U-Hall is an historic symbol of the University of Virginia's commitment to big-time athletics. The first event here in U-Hall was actually not a basketball game, but a performance by the Czech Philharmonic. The first basketball game was December of 1965, and UVA unfortunately lost to the Kentucky Wildcats 99-73. U-Hall has seen unforgettable moments of UVA history, including January 11th, 1971, an unforgettable night when a sophomore guard, 6'4" Barry Parkhill, made a shot in the last second in the game against number 2 South Carolina, and UVA won that game. University Hall is perhaps best known as the house that Ralph built. Harrisonburg High School student Ralph Sampson came to the University of Virginia in the fall of 1979. He was 7'4", and he joined the University of Virginia Cavaliers, playing here in U-Hall for 4 years while he was a student. And during that 4 years, the Cavaliers went 49-2. Now, despite the fact that U-Hall was the biggest indoor arena in Virginia when it opened in 1965, it only had about 9,000 seats. So UVA outgrew U-Hall by the 1980s, certainly the 90s, and it was replaced in the summer of 2006 by the John Paul Jones Arena.